Welcome to our channel, where we explore powerful stories from the Bible and draw meaningful lessons for today's world. In each story, we dive deep into the characters, events, and timeless truths that continue to inspire and guide us. Today, we're turning our focus to one of the most remarkable women in the Bible, Abigail. Abigail's story is found in 1 Samuel chapter 25 and is a profound narrative about wisdom, humility, and courage. She stands out as a woman of incredible strength, a peacemaker who intervenes in a potentially disastrous conflict between King David and her husband, Nabal. In a world where violence and pride often ruled the day, Abigail's grace and quick thinking brought peace where there could have been bloodshed. Through her actions, Abigail not only saves lives but also demonstrates the value of godly wisdom and the importance of humility in the face of conflict. This story will take us through the ancient cultural landscape, introduce us to the key characters, and guide us through the significant moments that led to Abigail's intervention. As we unpack the story, we'll explore the deeper themes of divine intervention, justice, and the role of women in biblical times. We'll also draw lessons that are applicable to our daily lives, whether it's dealing with difficult people, resolving conflicts, or trusting God's plan in challenging situations. Stay tuned and be sure to watch through to the end for reflections on how we can embody the qualities Abigail displayed. If you enjoy these in-depth biblical explorations, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video with those who would appreciate these insights. To fully appreciate the story of Abigail, it's essential to understand the historical and cultural backdrop in which her life unfolds. Abigail's story is set during the reign of King Saul, though she intersects with David, the future king of Israel, during his years of exile and struggle. At this time, Israel was a tribal society in transition. The nation had recently moved from the period of the judges, where there was no centralized government and leadership was often localized, to the era of kingship under Saul. Saul's reign had been marked by internal strife, external wars, and political instability. David, although anointed to be the next king by the prophet Samuel, was on the run from Saul, who viewed him as a threat. David's band of loyal men lived as fugitives, often in the wilderness, surviving by defending local towns and herding communities from marauding enemies like the Philistines. Women in Israelite society, like Abigail, were often relegated to the private sphere, managing their households and raising children. While the legal and social systems were patriarchal, women could still wield significant influence, especially in domestic and economic matters. As the wife of a wealthy man like Nabal, Abigail likely had responsibilities that involved overseeing servants and managing daily provisions for the household and flocks. Her quick thinking and decisive action in her encounter with David shows her influence, resourcefulness, and wisdom. Abigail is introduced in the Bible as intelligent and beautiful, a woman whose wisdom stands in stark contrast to her husband Nabal's foolishness. Though little is known about her background, the Bible emphasizes her exceptional qualities from the outset. Her intelligence is not just about intellect, it encompasses discernment, insight, and spiritual awareness, all of which play a vital role in her interaction with David and her intervention in preventing disaster. Abigail's wisdom is best demonstrated in her ability to see the bigger picture, both in terms of the immediate danger facing her household and the larger divine plan unfolding with David's rise to power. Abigail embodies the ideal of a peacemaker. In a culture where women were often confined to the domestic sphere, she steps into the public domain and changes the course of events. Her role in the story highlights the value of wisdom, humility, and courage in diffusing conflict. She also shows a deep faith in God's plan, trusting that her actions will not only protect her household, but also honor God's chosen servant, David. In stark contrast to Abigail's wisdom and grace, Nabal is described as a surly and mean man whose very name means fool. Nabal is wealthy, with extensive flocks of sheep and goats, but his character is as unpleasant as his fortune is vast. He is the embodiment of arrogance, pride, and selfishness. At this point in the story, David, although anointed to be the future king of Israel, is still a fugitive in the wilderness, fleeing from King Saul. He and his band of 600 men are in the region of Maon, near Carmel, during a time of great celebration and wealth for the local landowners. Specifically, this is the time of sheep shearing, an event in ancient Israel that was not only a practical agricultural necessity, but also a social and celebratory occasion. Sheep shearing was a time of feasting, abundance, and sharing, as landowners and shepherds would gather to shear the wool, marking the end of the season with festivities. In the ancient Near East, hospitality was a critical cultural value. Travelers and strangers were expected to be treated with generosity, and withholding hospitality was seen as a grave offense. In a time where inns or hotels were rare, showing kindness to travelers was more than a moral obligation. It was a matter of survival in harsh desert regions. For David and his men, who had been living off the land and providing protection to the local shepherds, this was an opportunity to seek provisions for themselves. In the harsh wilderness, food and supplies were scarce, and David's men had been essentially acting as an informal security force for Nabal's flocks. The biblical account makes it clear that David's men had been protecting Nabal's shepherds and flocks from thieves and marauders, which was a valuable service in a time where such threats were constant. They had ensured that Nabal's wealth was preserved and expanded during the grazing season, and this contribution deserved some compensation. Recognizing the festive nature of the sheep shearing time, David sent 10 young men to approach Nabal in a peaceful and respectful manner. The messengers were instructed to greet Nabal, offering blessings of peace and reminding him of the protection that David's men had provided. David's message was not demanding or confrontational, but polite and well within the bounds of cultural norms. He did not ask for a specific amount of provisions, leaving the generosity up to Nabal, saying, "Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." David's approach highlights a few key aspects of his leadership and understanding of social dynamics. First, his request was based on the idea of reciprocity. In the ancient Near Eastern culture, hospitality was a deeply ingrained social expectation, especially during festive times like sheep shearing. David's men had provided a service, and it was customary for landowners like Nabal to respond with generosity, particularly during times of abundance. Additionally, by sending a peaceful request rather than taking provisions by force, David demonstrated his respect for social order and his desire for a peaceful resolution. Nabal's reaction to David's request, however, is a sharp contrast to the hospitality expected in that culture. True to his character, Nabal responds to David's courteous request with scorn and arrogance. Rather than recognizing the protection David had provided or understanding the cultural expectation of generosity, Nabal chooses to insult both David and his men. Nabal's response is laced with disdain and ignorance. He says, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse?" Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. This statement is not just a refusal, but a deliberate insult. By pretending not to know who David was, Nabal ignores the reality that David was a well-known figure in Israel, both as a warrior who had slain Goliath and as a leader of men. His refusal to acknowledge David's growing influence and status was not only disrespectful, but also a reckless dismissal of a powerful figure. Moreover, Nabal's comparison of David to runaway servants shows his complete lack of insight into the political and social situation of the time. David was not just a renegade or outlaw, he was the anointed future king of Israel, even if he was currently in exile. Nabal's failure to recognize this or to respond with appropriate hospitality was a grave error in judgment. Nabal's words not only insulted David, but also challenged his authority and honor, which in the cultural context of the time could not be easily overlooked. In ancient Israel, honor was a fundamental social value, and Nabal's refusal to provide for David's men was a slap in the face. Instead of responding with generosity during a time of plenty, Nabal's actions reflected his selfishness and greed. His refusal to part with his wealth, even when his prosperity had been safeguarded by David's men, underscores his arrogance and lack of gratitude. Nabal's foolishness is not just a matter of poor judgment. It reflects a deeper moral failure. He is disconnected from the realities around him, oblivious to the danger his actions are causing. He prioritizes his wealth and status over relationships, and his disregard for social norms of hospitality and respect marks him as a man who values only himself. His failure to listen to others, whether it's his servants, who warn him of the impending danger, or Abigail, who tries to mitigate the crisis, underscores his stubbornness and lack of discernment. When David receives the message of Nabal's insult, His immediate response is one of righteous anger. In the ancient world, an insult like Nabal's was not merely a personal offense. It was a challenge to one's honor and standing. David, who had restrained himself from taking vengeance against Saul despite being wronged, found Nabal's insolence too much to bear. David's anger quickly turns into action. He tells his men to strap their swords, and he gathers 400 armed men to march toward Nabal's estate, intent on destroying Nabal and all the males in his household. This decision to take vengeance reveals David's impulsiveness in the heat of the moment. Though David had shown great restraint and wisdom in his dealings with Saul, Nabal's insult strikes a different chord. This reaction underscores David's humanity. He was a man who could be moved by anger and a sense of injustice, just like anyone else. David's decision to take vengeance also highlights the seriousness of Nabal's offense. In a culture where honor and shame were central to social relations, Nabal's refusal to provide for David's men was seen as not only an act of disrespect, but also a violation of the social contract. David's desire for revenge was fueled by his understanding of this cultural norm, as well as by his own personal offense at Nabal's insult. As David and his men march toward Nabal's estate, the stage is set for a violent confrontation. David is determined to wipe out Nabal's household, a punishment that, while extreme by today's standards, would have been seen as justified retribution in the context of the time. His decision reflects the high stakes of honor and hospitality in ancient Israelite society and the dangerous consequences of Nabal's foolishness. The situation appears dire. With David and his men prepared for battle, the conflict between David and Nabal is about to erupt into violence. The sheep-shearing festival that should have been a time of celebration and generosity is instead transformed into a potential bloodbath, all because of Nabal's arrogance and failure to show respect. At this point in the story, it seems that disaster is inevitable, until Abigail, Nabal's wise and discerning wife, steps in to avert the crisis. This rising tension in the narrative highlights the importance of wisdom, hospitality, and respect for social norms. Nabal's disregard for these values nearly leads to the destruction of his household, while David's impulsive reaction shows a thin line between justice and vengeance. The conflict between David and Nabal sets the stage for Abigail's pivotal intervention, which will ultimately bring peace and prevent needless bloodshed. When Abigail, Nabal's wife, learns of the brewing conflict between her husband and David, she immediately recognizes the severity of the situation. A servant, aware of Nabal's insult to David and the imminent threat from David's armed men, reports the details to Abigail. The servant describes how David's men had been good to Nabal's shepherds, protecting them in the wilderness, and warns Abigail that disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. This moment reveals not only Nabal's foolishness, but also Abigail's discernment. While Nabal had acted in arrogance and ignorance, Abigail is portrayed as a woman of great understanding. She quickly grasps the consequences of her husband's actions and the imminent danger they face. Without wasting any time, Abigail takes matters into her own hands, formulating a plan to avert the disaster. Her swift action is a testament to her wisdom and decisiveness. Abigail does not panic or become paralyzed by fear, but instead calmly assesses the situation and devises a strategy. She understands that time is of the essence. David is already on his way with 400 men, and any delay could lead to the destruction of her household. Abigail's quick thinking contrasts sharply with Nabal's reckless behavior, emphasizing the difference between foolishness and wisdom. Abigail's approach to David is both humble and diplomatic. She does not go empty-handed, but prepares a generous offering to present to David and his men. She takes 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, roasted grain, raisins, and cakes of pressed figs. This gesture of hospitality and generosity contrasts with Nabal's refusal to provide provisions and reflects the proper social and cultural norms of the time. Abigail's actions demonstrate her deep understanding of peacemaking and reconciliation. She knows that David has been insulted and wronged by her husband, and she seeks to make amends through an offering that acknowledges the value of David's protection. By bringing these gifts, Abigail is showing David that she recognizes the service he and his men had provided and is attempting to restore the broken relationship caused by Nabal's offense. In addition to her gifts, Abigail's humility is evident in the way she approaches David. When she meets him, she immediately gets down from her donkey and bows down before him with her face to the ground. This posture of submission and respect is a significant gesture, especially considering that Abigail is from a wealthy household. Despite her status, she humbles herself before David, acknowledging his power and authority in this moment. Her humility is further emphasized in her words to David. She takes responsibility for the offense, even though it was her husband who insulted David. "Let the blame be on me alone," she says, taking the burden of her husband's foolishness upon herself. This act of selflessness reflects Abigail's desire to make peace and prevent bloodshed. She does not seek to justify Nabal's actions, but instead tries to deflect David's anger by offering herself as a sacrificial mediator. One of the most remarkable aspects of Abigail's intervention is her speech to David. It is a powerful display of wisdom, insight, and understanding of both the immediate situation and God's larger plan. Abigail's speech is one of the longest by a woman in the Bible, and it reveals her depth of character and knowledge of God's will. Abigail begins her speech by acknowledging David's grievance and the foolishness of her husband Nabal. She says, "Please pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him." By openly acknowledging her husband's folly, Abigail does not try to defend his actions, but instead distances herself from them. She recognizes that Nabal's behavior is indefensible and seeks to de-escalate the situation by focusing on reconciliation rather than confrontation. Abigail then makes a prophetic statement about David's future. She says, "The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live." Here Abigail not only acknowledges David's role as a warrior for God, but also reminds him of the higher calling he has received. She subtly warns David that taking vengeance into his own hands would be wrongdoing, and that he should leave matters of justice to God. By doing this, Abigail is appealing to David's conscience and his understanding of God's justice. This part of Abigail's speech is particularly powerful because it shifts the focus from the immediate conflict to the long-term consequences of David's actions. She reminds David that he is destined for greatness and that shedding innocent blood in a moment of anger could tarnish his future as a leader. Abigail's insight into David's potential and her ability to appeal to his sense of morality demonstrate her profound wisdom. She recognizes that David is not just a warrior seeking revenge, but a man chosen by God for a greater purpose. Abigail also speaks about God's protection over David, saying, "Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God, but the lives of your enemies he will hurl away." This metaphor of being bound securely in the bundle of the living suggests that David's life is precious and protected by God, while his enemies will face destruction. Abigail is encouraging David to trust in God's protection and justice, rather than taking matters into his own hands. Finally, Abigail concludes her speech by expressing hope that David will remember her favorably when he achieves his future success. She says, "When the Lord has brought my Lord success, remember your servant." This final plea is both humble and forward-looking. Abigail does not seek immediate reward for her actions, but instead asks that David remember her kindness in the future, further emphasizing her selflessness and humility. Abigail's intervention is a masterclass in peacemaking and diplomacy. She approaches David with humility, generosity, and wisdom, appealing to both his sense of justice and his future as a leader chosen by God. Her actions prevent a violent confrontation and spare her household from destruction, while also preventing David from committing an act of vengeance that could have stained his future kingship. Abigail's ability to navigate this tense situation with such grace and insight demonstrates her deep understanding of human nature and God's will. She recognizes the importance of acting swiftly to prevent disaster, and she uses her wisdom to appeal to David's better nature. Through her speech, Abigail not only averts a crisis, but also becomes a powerful example of godly wisdom and the power of a peacemaker. The moment Abigail intervenes in the conflict between David and Nabal, a remarkable change takes place. David, who had been on the brink of seeking revenge for Nabal's insult, is moved by Abigail's humility, wisdom, and the righteousness of her appeal. His reaction to her plea not only showcases David's ability to recognize godly wisdom, but also demonstrates profound lessons about humility, leadership, and self-control. This part of the story highlights how one person's wisdom and peaceful approach can transform a potentially violent situation into one of reconciliation and peace. David's initial response to Abigail's plea is one of surprise and deep appreciation. As Abigail bows before him, offers gifts, and takes responsibility for her husband's offense, David's heart is softened. He recognizes the sincerity of her approach and the wisdom behind her words. Up until this moment, David had been filled with anger, intent on exacting revenge for Nabal's arrogance. His mind was set on a path of destruction, but Abigail's intervention changes everything. In her speech, Abigail appeals to David's sense of righteousness and reminds him of his greater calling. She points out that acting in haste and shedding innocent blood would tarnish his future as a leader chosen by God. David, in this moment, sees the truth of Abigail's words and the wisdom behind them. He realizes that his desire for revenge was not aligned with the will of God, and that Abigail's intervention was a divine act to prevent him from committing an unjust act. David responds to Abigail with words of gratitude and praise. He says to her, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands." In these words, David acknowledges that it was God who sent Abigail to stop him from carrying out his vengeful plan. He recognizes that Abigail's presence and her wise counsel were part of God's intervention to save him from making a grave mistake. David's ability to recognize and accept wisdom, even when it comes from someone of lower status like Abigail, is a testament to his humility. He does not dismiss her because she is a woman or because she is the wife of the man who insulted him. Instead, he listens carefully to her words and allows her wisdom to penetrate his heart. This moment reveals David's willingness to learn and his openness to correction, which are qualities of a great leader. David goes beyond just acknowledging Abigail's wisdom. He blesses her for her intervention. He says, "May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands." David's blessing of Abigail shows that he understands the full gravity of the situation. He realizes that, if not for Abigail's actions, he would have committed an act of violence that went against his calling as a future king. David's blessing is not just for Abigail, but also for the divine wisdom that guided her. He praises God for sending her at the right moment to stop him from acting in anger. This acknowledgement of God's intervention through Abigail highlights David's faith and his recognition that God is ultimately in control. By blessing Abigail, David is also affirming that wisdom and peace are far more valuable than vengeance and pride. David's response to Abigail's plea offers profound lessons about humility, leadership, and controlling anger. First and foremost, David's ability to listen to Abigail and recognize the wisdom in her words teaches us the value of humility. A humble leader is one who is open to correction and willing to admit when they are wrong. David's willingness to be corrected by Abigail, despite his initial anger, shows that humility is a critical trait for anyone in a position of leadership. It also demonstrates that true leaders are not above receiving counsel, even from those who may be considered lesser in terms of status. Furthermore, David's decision to control his anger and refrain from taking revenge teaches us the importance of self-control. Anger, when left unchecked, can lead to rash decisions and destructive actions. In David's case, his anger toward Nabal nearly led him to commit bloodshed. However, by listening to Abigail and reflecting on her words, David was able to rein in his emotions and make a wiser decision. This lesson is especially relevant in today's world, where emotional reactions can often lead to regretful actions. David's example shows us that it is possible to pause, reflect, and choose a path of peace, even in the heat of anger. David's response also highlights the importance of discernment in leadership. A good leader is one who can distinguish between personal offense and matters of justice. In this case, David was initially blinded by his personal offense at Nabal's insult. However, after hearing Abigail's plea, he was able to see the bigger picture and recognize that seeking revenge was not in line with God's will. This ability to shift focus from personal grievances to the greater good is a hallmark of wise and discerning leadership. Finally, David's response underscores the power of God's intervention through human agents. Abigail was the vessel through which God intervened in this situation, and David's recognition of this divine intervention teaches us to be open to the ways in which God may speak to us through others. Sometimes God sends wisdom through unexpected sources, and it is up to us to be humble enough to recognize it. In this story, David teaches us valuable lessons about the dangers of unchecked anger and the importance of being open to correction. His response serves as a reminder that humility is key to effective leadership, and that God often intervenes through the wisdom of others to guide us on the right path. After Abigail skillfully persuades David to relent from his plan of vengeance, she returns to her home, where she finds Nabal in the midst of a feast. Nabal, oblivious to the danger he had narrowly escaped, is celebrating in grand style. The Bible describes his feast as being like that of a king, indicating that Nabal was indulging in a luxurious and excessive celebration. At this moment, Nabal is drunk, completely unaware of how close he had come to facing the wrath of David and his men. Abigail, ever the wise and discerning woman, chooses not to confront Nabal while he is in his drunken state. She knows that speaking to him in this condition would be futile, and it would only serve to escalate the situation. Instead, she wisely decides to wait until the morning when Nabal is sober and more likely to comprehend the gravity of what has transpired. This moment shows Abigail's continued wisdom and restraint as she carefully considers the timing of her actions. The next morning, Abigail approaches Nabal and informs him of everything that had happened. She tells him how David had been preparing to attack, how she had interceded on his behalf, and how her actions had prevented a bloodbath. Nabal, upon hearing the news, is struck with fear and shock. The Bible tells us that his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. This description suggests that Nabal likely suffered a heart attack or stroke, rendering him paralyzed and incapacitated. For 10 days, Nabal remains in this state, and then the Lord strikes him down, and he dies. Nabal's sudden death is a clear demonstration of divine judgment. Though Abigail's intervention had saved him from David's sword, Nabal could not escape the judgment of God. His foolishness, arrogance, and lack of regard for others finally caught up with him. The fact that Nabal died as a direct result of God's intervention underscores the theme of divine justice that runs throughout this story. The story of Nabal's fate offers a powerful reflection on the theme of divine justice. Throughout the Bible, there are numerous examples of how God holds individuals accountable for their actions, especially when they exhibit pride, arrogance, and wickedness. Nabal's story is one such example, where human intervention, in the form of Abigail's wisdom, delays immediate consequences, but the ultimate judgment comes from God. In the Bible, pride is often associated with downfall, and Nabal's story follows this pattern. His refusal to honor David's request and his arrogant dismissal of David's reputation are signs of his inflated sense of self-importance. Nabal's fate serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and the consequences that come from rejecting humility and wisdom. After the death of Nabal, David sees in Abigail not just a beautiful woman, but a person of extraordinary wisdom and courage. He had already been deeply impressed by her when she intervened to prevent bloodshed between David's men and her household. David's response to Abigail's actions reveals the profound respect he held for her. In 1 Samuel chapter 25, verses 32 to 33, David praised Abigail, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day." David's proposal to Abigail is a direct result of his admiration for her qualities. After Nabal's death, David wastes no time in reaching out to Abigail. In the first chapter, 25 verse 39, we see that David, hearing of Nabal's death, sends his servants to propose marriage to Abigail. This act shows that David saw Abigail as more than just a widow in need of protection. He valued her as a partner whose wisdom and grace could complement his leadership. David's proposal also reflects his recognition of the importance of surrounding himself with individuals who could offer sound advice and support. As a leader of men and future king of Israel, David understood that wise counsel was essential for ruling well. Abigail's intelligence, discernment, and moral integrity made her a valuable ally. In marrying her, David was not only gaining a wife, but also a trusted confidant and advisor. Abigail's acceptance of David's proposal is marked by the same humility and wisdom that had characterized her previous actions. Her acceptance is significant because it shows that Abigail was not motivated by ambition or a desire for power. She had just lost her wealthy husband and could have sought to maintain her independence, but instead, she chose to align herself with David. Her decision was likely influenced by her recognition of David's anointing by God as the future king of Israel. Abigail, with her keen insight and understanding of divine will, may have seen this marriage as part of God's greater plan. Abigail's humility in accepting David's proposal is also reflective of her character as a servant of God. Throughout the story, Abigail shows herself to be a woman of faith, and her decision to marry David can be seen as an act of obedience to God's will. She understood that David was God's chosen leader for Israel, and that aligning herself with him would allow her to play a role in the unfolding of God's plan for the nation. As David's wife, Abigail's role would undoubtedly extend beyond that of a mere spouse. She would have had the opportunity to influence David's decisions and play a significant role in the development of his leadership. Although the Bible does not provide extensive details about Abigail's life after her marriage to David, we can speculate on the potential influence she may have had based on her earlier actions. Abigail's wisdom and diplomatic skills would have made her an invaluable asset to David, particularly during times of conflict or political tension. As someone who had successfully diffused a potentially violent situation between David and Nabal, Abigail had already proven her ability to handle delicate matters with tact and insight. It is likely that David would have turned to her for counsel in difficult situations, trusting her judgment and perspective. Furthermore, as David's wife, Abigail may have had the opportunity to influence the future king's approach to leadership. David was a man after God's own heart, but he was also human and prone to mistakes, as seen in other parts of his life. Abigail's presence in his life could have provided a stabilizing influence, helping him to make wise and measured decisions. Her role in David's household may have extended beyond the domestic sphere to include advising him on matters of governance and diplomacy. Abigail also had the potential to play a key role in shaping the moral and spiritual atmosphere of David's court. As a woman of faith, she would have been a source of spiritual encouragement and guidance for David, particularly as he faced the challenges of leadership. Abigail's influence may have extended to those around David, helping to create an environment of faithfulness to God's will and promoting a culture of humility and justice. Although Abigail is not explicitly mentioned as a queen in the biblical text, her marriage to David positions her as a queen in waiting. As David's wife, she would have shared in his rise to power and ultimately his reign as king of Israel. In this role, Abigail would have had the opportunity to shape the future of Israel through her influence on David and her role in the royal court. The story of Abigail is rich with lessons that resonate in our lives today, demonstrating the timeless value of wisdom, humility, and divine providence. We see in this story the power of wisdom. Abigail's quick thinking and discernment were pivotal in averting disaster. When she learned of David's impending attack, she acted swiftly to gather provisions and approach him. Her wise and strategic response not only saved her household from destruction, but also prevented bloodshed. This teaches us the importance of being prepared and using our wisdom to navigate crises effectively. Peacemaking and humility are evident, and Abigail exemplifies the qualities of a true peacemaker. In a high-stakes situation filled with anger and resentment, she chose to approach David with humility, acknowledging his grievances while appealing to his better nature. Her grace under pressure highlights the effectiveness of humility and calmness in resolving conflicts. Abigail's example encourages us to remain humble and seek peace, even when faced with hostility. Abigail's timely intervention underscores the idea of divine providence. Her actions were not just coincidental, they were part of a larger plan. This illustrates how God can work through individuals to achieve his purposes. Abigail's story reminds us to remain open to the ways in which God may use us to bring about positive change, even in challenging circumstances. Abigail's relationship with Nabal provides valuable insights into handling difficult individuals. Despite Nabal's arrogance and foolishness, Abigail remained respectful and dignified. She did not allow his behavior to dictate her response. Instead, she focused on what was right. This teaches us the importance of maintaining our integrity and composure when dealing with challenging relationships, recognizing that our responses can impact the situation. Abigail's approach to conflict resolution can serve as a powerful model in today's world. In an era where disagreements often escalate into hostility, her method of addressing conflicts with humility and wisdom is invaluable. By prioritizing dialogue over confrontation and approaching others with respect, we can navigate disputes more effectively. Abigail's story encourages us to listen actively, acknowledge the perspectives of others, and seek common ground to foster reconciliation. Abigail's actions provide essential lessons for leaders. Her ability to influence David while demonstrating humility is a reminder that true leadership is not about exerting power, but about serving others. Leaders who embody humility and wisdom can inspire those around them and create an environment of collaboration and trust. Abigail's story challenges us to reflect on our own leadership styles, encouraging us to prioritize the well-being of others while making decisions. Abigail's traits, wisdom, humility, and a peacemaking spirit offer us a blueprint for our lives. In moments of tension or conflict, we can ask ourselves, how can we respond with grace and wisdom? How can we be agents of peace in our relationships? By embracing these qualities, we can navigate our personal challenges more effectively and contribute to a more harmonious environment, whether at home, work, or in our communities. In summary, Abigail's story is not just a historical account. It is a source of timeless wisdom and inspiration. Her life teaches us about the power of wise decision-making, the importance of humility in leadership, and the value of grace in conflict resolution. By applying these lessons, we can all strive to be more like Abigail in our daily lives. As we consider Abigail's qualities, we are encouraged to reflect on how we can embody wisdom and humility in our own lives. Are there areas where we can exercise discernment and make thoughtful decisions? How can we approach conflicts with grace, seeking peace rather than escalation? Abigail's story invites us to examine our responses to challenges, inspiring us to be peacemakers and wise leaders in our families, workplaces, and communities. If Abigail's story has resonated with you, we invite you to take action. Like and share this video to spread the wisdom found in her narrative. Subscribe to our channel for more biblical stories and lessons that can enrich your understanding and application of faith in everyday life. Join us as we explore the timeless truths of the Bible and how they can guide us through our personal journeys. Let Abigail's legacy inspire you to cultivate wisdom and humility in your life. Together, we can learn from these biblical narratives and strive to make a positive impact in our world. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to sharing more enlightening stories with you.